Set the plasma incinerators to overcharge and let's melt some enemy space marines and probably some friendly ones as well. Let's talk Hellblasters in Warhammer 40K 10th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video I thought we'd focus on the Hellblaster squad and talk about what these dangerous Primaris with plasma can do in the new edition of the game. In the video we'll talk through their models briefly, then look through their datasheet, and a few other buffs, options and synergies that might help them out on the table. Hellblasters were one of the very first Primaris miniatures, coming out alongside the Intercessors and Inceptors in the Dark Imperium box set. I think since they came out, they've generally been a fairly popular fan favourite. There's just something really good fun about an entire squad of Space Marines armed with chunky plasma guns, very dangerous to the enemy, but not without risk to the squad themselves. Within the Space Marine organisation, they fill the role of fire support, and are highly trained to only overcharge their plasma weapons in the direst of circumstances, but are willing to do so if absolutely necessary, risking death in service of the chapter, if it's the only way to take down a great foe. Currently from Games Workshop, the kit's £37.50, €50 or $60, and you can get some Hellblasters at a discount in the Dark Angels Combat Patrol box, and they have been around in prior easy build kits as well, such as Dark Imperium and the Warhammer Conquest magazine, so there might be a few more floating around cheaper than normal than most. In terms of getting points on the board, Hellblasters aren't a terrible choice if you're looking for that. 4.2 points per dollar, which is very good as Warhammer goes. They're perhaps a bit of a rare example of a 40k elite infantry kit that comes in a squad of 10, compared with say other units like Devastators or Retributors that come in squads of 5. In the squad you get some small aesthetic customizations for all the different guns. Previously, GW gave them very slightly different variations in in-game rule depending on whether you had an assault, heavy or regular plasma incinerator, but now mercifully they're all the same rules-wise, so tiny wargear changes don't matter too much, and are otherwise fairly standard Primaris Space Marines, intercessor bodies with dangerous plasma guns. Not a huge amount of customization, you can give the leader plasma pistol as well as plasma gun. If you're looking to pick them up at a discount, Element Games sells them in the UK too, around £32, so a 15% discount there, and GAT Games also has them in Australia for 21% off. I'll leave links to both of those down in the video description if you were looking to pick up a kit. Getting into their actual rules and datasheet for 10th edition 40k though, and Hellblaster squads at the moment are a choice for Codex Space Marines, 425 points or 250 for a squad of 10. Still a fairly high investment squad at 25 points per model, though a little bit less than they've been in the past historically. Their stat line isn't the most exciting thing in the world, basically pretty similar to a standard Intercessor stat line. Toughness 4, a 3+ save and 2 wounds on the defensive. Not particularly exciting for 25 points, they're definitely a unit that's a bit more on the fragile side and dangerous, as opposed to tanky. They've only got Objective Control 1 and they aren't battle line, and they are Primaris Marines with the Tacticas keyword, which is relevant for which transports they can go in. They are locked out of Rhinos and Razorbacks and things. Finally, as with all Space Marines, they do have a little bit of melee threat, 3 attacks at Strength 4, AP 0 and Damage 1. If there's a fair few of them, that is enough to bully light infantry squads quite well. Obviously not their main purpose, but if it made sense you could potentially shoot something else, and still have a good chance to wipe out a small squad of light infantry in combat anyway if the enemy got too close with them. Obviously the main event for the Hellblasters is very much their shooting though. They each come equipped with their standard plasma incinerator, but also it looks like all of them get a plasma pistol built into their rules for free now. Previously it was just the sergeant who could take one of those as he's modelled with one, but now it seems that they can still pack a little bit of plasma fire either in combat as well if it doesn't make sense for them to fall back with tactical doctrine or something. It's also relevant for their fire on death rule, as we'll talk about in a second. Otherwise though, that plasma incinerator has a kind of similar setup to the Space Marine bolt rifle. It also gets 2 shots out to 24 inches, and it both has the assault and the heavy keywords, so it means that you can either choose between advancing and moving anywhere between 7 and 12 inches, and then you can still fire at full effect there, or you can stay stationary and get a +1 to hit, so the Hellblasters would hit on 2s. Both of those are really quite nice to have. I guess it rewards good positioning if you can afford to have them stationary for a turn or so and have them shoot to full effect, but the advance and shoot is really quite powerful as well I think. It means they'll have a lot easier time getting range on their targets, and I do quite like in 10th edition that their maximum damage output is equally effective at 24-inch range as it is 12 inches. I think previous versions of the rules for the rapid fire ones were just a little bit underwhelming when they had to get up really close and personal to rapid fire. As with normal plasma weapons, you have the option to either fire normally, and that's 2 shots at strength 7, AP 2 and damage 1, or you can overcharge them, give them all the hazardous keywords, so you have to take a hazardous check after the weapon's fired, and that fires at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 2, the familiar plasma profile. Just for some very rough numbers for a squad of 5, these are the sort of numbers that you can expect out of them if they don't get the heavy keyword and move and shoot. And these are the numbers for overcharging, but assuming no deaths. If any of them actually do die, it'll increase your firepower even more on average with therefore the chapter rule. Roughly speaking, with the overcharge you can expect around about 6 dead termagants, 4 or 5 space marines who will get a small save against them, around about 1 terminator, a lot safer behind his 4+ invulnerable save, and a little bit lackluster against vehicles with 4 wounds being done to a rhino tank. I've also included the numbers if you're running them with Oath of Moment as well. They're really impressive against enemy space marines with an average of 7 of them dead, and for harder targets like the Terminator and vehicle you're around about double your damage output, around about 2 dead Terminators rather than 1, or 8 wounds to a rhino tank, a pretty significant increase compared with 4. Obviously if you are overcharging like that it doesn't go all one way. It does mean that on average you'll lose around about 1 more Hellblaster from that, 5 hazardous checks and a 1 in 6 chance. Though if you like you can command point reroll it, though that will be quite an investment and only saves 1 model. I feel like most of the time people aren't going to be command point rerolling the hazardous checks on these guys though, as they get their fire in deaths rule, which actually gives you a bit of a reward if they do die to their own overcharged fire. Speaking of which, the Hellblasters for the chapter rule I think is really quite a fun one. I feel like a bit more thought has been put into this one than maybe some of the average special rules for other units. It's not really a copy-paste ability that's present on a whole ton of different units. The rule is that each time a model in this unit is destroyed, you roll a dice and on a 3+, before you remove the model from play, you get to make 1 final shooting attack from it which it can safely overcharge as it can't deal any more damage to itself than already being dead. It's effectively quite a nice extra damage increase if the squad's firing on overcharge mode, between the hazardous checks and then the chance to fire again. On average, you get around about an extra 11% damage output chance for the squad, at the cost of losing models of course, and at least those ones can't cause any further casualties by their own hazardous rolls. Then it's perhaps even better than the enemy turn as well. Ideally what would happen I guess is your Hellblaster squad steps up and kills something important, and then your opponent recognises them as a big threat to them and tries to wipe them out with their own shooting, and if they kill a fair chunk of them then you get really quite a lot of return fire that can be shot at anything that they want in range that they can see. Sometimes it can just be useful for the extra damage on the most frontline enemy units that you're going to be trying to kill next turn. But perhaps in the ideal situation, if you could try and kill something that hasn't dealt damage yet, say for example a squad of dangerous space marines that were just about to charge, that way you could not only get the extra damage output, but you could potentially save the lives of others of your models as well. I do quite like the way that it's also somewhat relevant in melee as well, due to plasma pistols being a thing for the squad now apparently. It means that you should be able to go down firing a little bit of plasma death, even if it's not quite as exciting as the plasma incinerators. Overall I feel like they're quite a fun feels-good unit for the Space Marines now, no longer commanding quite as high a price tag as they were before, a longer effective range that makes them really quite easy to use, and a nice anti-Space Marine profile that's really quite good against Space Marines who tend to be just quite common in the meta in general. I think being at least fairly effective against everything is a big plus for them, definitely means that you don't have to think too hard about their use, compared with some really specialised things that might only be good at killing tanks or killing infantry. To make their damage output even better, of course, Space Marines can get Oath of Moment. It is basically great on just about every unit, and you can only use it on one enemy target, but perhaps like many things, I think it's very nice on the Hellblasters indeed. They've got multi-damage shots with good armor penetration, but not that much strength, and that's excellent for the wound rerolls. If you're taking aim at an enemy unit that's either toughness 9 or higher, effectively it gives them a plus 122% damage increase, so slightly over double there, which is massively meaningful. I think with just how big and threatening a squad of them can be, it would be quite a nice one to really help punch up against tough enemy stuff, though obviously weighed up against where Oath of Moment could work elsewhere. Otherwise, for more standard Space Marines, the Gladius can give them a few things from their combat doctrines. Devastator is maybe a little bit less relevant for them, as their weapons already have assault, so can advance and shoot normally, though it can be relevant in a squad that you might have the bolted discipline enhancement if that's going for you. Otherwise, tactical doctrine for fall back and shoot, and assault doctrine could actually let you follow up a big move with a charge if you really wanted to, perhaps to bully some light infantry if it made sense, and you could still fire your plasma incinerators beforehand. For the stratagems, perhaps Storm of Fire could be one of the better ones, giving you an extra AP if that was relevant against some high save targets. Colour tends to be everywhere in 40k as well, so it's useful for that as well. And Armour of Contempt could be nice just to keep them a little bit safer, if you think it's going to be the difference between your opponent having to expend loads more firepower to wipe them out, or perhaps saving some of the units. Could use squad tactics as well for some reactive movement. Occasionally that could be kind of big to keep the squad safe against enemies keeping too close and trying to charge you. With a max size squad, Overwatch could be interesting enough from the core book as well. Overcharging might be a little bit questionable though, even with the shoots on death. You're going to be getting far less hits per hazardous roll that you have to make. For leading the squad, a fair few characters can join them, though I'd say they do have slightly limited leader choice compared with most. Quite a lot of the unique chapter choices can't lead them, and are instead locked to things like Stern Guard or Intercessor squads. I think perhaps if I had to pick one character to lead them, then maybe the Primaris Lieutenant might be one of the first ones to go for. He gives you lethal hits for the units, very nice for helping them punch up against tough targets that they'd be wounding on 5s, and also allows them to fall back and shoot as well, so it gives them a bit of immunity against getting tagged in melee by annoying things, even if you're not in tactical doctrine. If you were taking a lieutenant along, I'd be really quite tempted to pick up Bolter Discipline if that wasn't in play elsewhere. That's the one that gives you sustained hit spawn as well, so it just doubles down on even more firepower out of them. And with a lieutenant it could make things like Overwatch a lot more tempting as well, as every 6 would be both a sustained hit and a lethal hit. Very high value 6s and Ds. In Devastator Doctrine it also gives you critical hits of a 5+ as well, and that would work both with the sustained and the lethal as well. Just ridiculously enormous damage output, and even more so if you can spare Oath of Moment for the units. I feel like if you were wanting a character in general though, you'd probably have to run them in a 10-man squad. I feel like the value of them could just be a little bit questionable if you're running them in 5-man units. Just seems that you'd be taking a character that is a massive significant portion of the squad's entire cost there. Otherwise, the options could be a Librarian for 4+ invulnerable save and a bit more shooting with his smite attack. Seems nice enough, and again you could give him Bolter Discipline once more. The captain's at 80 points and have a bit more of a melee focus, though could give you free stratagems. I feel like he might be a bit better served in a unit that wants to be getting in close and personal with the enemy and into combat though. Or you could pick up an Apothecary, which is the cheapest of the options, just 55 points and restores models, which could be nice enough given that you might do some chip damage to yourself, and again could bear that enhancement. Otherwise, the usual Space Marine fire support type things could help, incursors for a +1 to hit against a target, storm speeders for bonuses to wound tanks and vehicles or extra AP, or perhaps even the regular boxy dreadnought for reroll 1s to hit for nearby infantry units. These are perhaps more things that you just buy in because you want them in the list in general though, probably not just to support any one unit. For transport options, I feel like the Hellblasters perhaps are one of the better units to stick in the various Primaris transports. You could treat an Impulsor as a bit of a battle bus, with Hellblasters firing guns out the top. Could be a fairly scary amount of firepower coming out of it, perhaps particularly if you had a missile launcher as well, though the hazardous checks could be a bit painful, causing you 3 mortal wounds each time you fail one. Otherwise look like perhaps one of the better units to use with drop pods now. You could near guarantee a good line of sight and an alpha strike, though they don't tend to be desperately popular within 10th edition in general. I feel that the Repulsor is also a very good fit for them. They seem just all around fairly good value at the moment for just less than 200 points, has a whole flurry of different guns, pretty cheap with the 16 wounds and toughness 12 for 200 points, plus the Hellblaster one of the best units to make use of its actual special rule. They can get back into the tank if they get threatened with a charge, and if they were just about to die in melee, that seems like a very nice way to get them shooting for another round, particularly if the charging unit can't handle a big toughness 12 tank. Out of these, I feel like the Hellblasters probably have enough value to warrant some support if you want to field them. The Bolter Discipline trait seems really excellent, particularly combined with a Primaris Lieutenant. I think out of the transports, my favourite might actually be the Repulsor at the moment, though of course that's really quite a big all-in strategy. A pretty expensive tank transporting around a pretty expensive unit. Otherwise, the specific chapters do have a few options for them, though as mentioned they really don't have all that many options for which characters can join them. Quite a lot of the Primaris characters across the range seem to be locked to join things like Stern Guard and Assault Intercessors, and can't join the Hellblaster squads. The Ultramarines don't have any characters that can join them, but they could make use of Gilliman's Double Oath, or maybe Uriel Ventris granting them Deep Strike, even if he doesn't join the unit. I guess that could be one way to get them into battle, though you could just use Strategic Reserve. For the Dark Angels, Azrael can lead them, again he seems like a reasonable enough choice for them. A 4+ invulnerable save like the Librarians, generates CP in his own right, and also gives them sustained hits 1 for extra firepower, quite a nice all-rounder there. The Dark Angel's unique detachment has a few useful stratagems as well. 1 CP to return fire if a model is killed, just doubling down on even more crazy enemy turn firepower. And a 1 command point 1 for lethal hits on demand as well. That could be handy to have them punch up against tougher stuff, and could well be worth it on a bigger squad. Otherwise, for the more melee dedicated chapters, perhaps not too much exciting. Black Templars can make them a little bit tougher. Though for Blood Angels and Space Wolves, I'd probably say there's not all that much going on. Obviously usable enough just for the strength of the datasheets, but perhaps not too many unique synergies. Deathwatch being the Space Marine Firepower chapter these days though, seems to have quite a lot of good stuff. 3 turns of fairly nice shooting buffs, sustained hits, lethal hits, and precision on criticals. Another way to get a double oath of moment with a tome of Ectoclades, which the Hellblasters really quite like. The special issue stratagems could be okay on them, though maybe slightly better suited to other guns, and you can potentially fill them as part of a Fortis kill team for slightly more efficient stratagems, paired with some intercessors and maybe an outrider or two. Overall, I feel like they're just generally quite effective in most chapters. The Gladius has some really quite nice things for them, particularly with that enhancement, and otherwise, as with a lot of ranged units, probably Deathwatch are one of the better choices for them, though a big bunch with Azrael does seem fun. Space Marines do have a whole load of competition for the Space Marines with guns niche though. There's a fair few fire support squads in a similar sort of price bracket, maybe things like Eradicators, Stern Guard Veterans, and a standard Devastator squad could be some of their bigger rivals. The Eradicators are a bit cheaper and get their big rerolls against enemy vehicles and monsters, a lot more dedicated and less good at killing light infantry though. Stern Guard Veterans are a bit cheaper and are quite nice general all-purpose Space Marines, a bit more slanted towards killing light infantry, but they can certainly punch up with devastating wounds firepower. They're another unit like the Hellblasters that really enjoy Oath of Moments. For other flavours of fire support, you could get Devastators with quad las cannons for 120 points. Again, more dedicated firepower, but perhaps don't compete quite so well as not really being a squad that wants to be on the move. And you could just weigh them up against the other various marine damage dealers as well, the Gladiator Lancer, Redemptor Dreadnought, and the standard Repulsor or Executioner, though of course with a Repulsor it might give you a bit more incentive to field them. In general, in competitive lists, I feel like they do enough to have a niche with all this competition. Nothing does exactly what they do quite as well as they do. They do have a really nice special rule, and I feel like if you're looking for an either-or choice within Codex Space Marines, the Stern Guard Veterans are perhaps the most serious to look for in competition. 20 points less and a bit more durable per point, and still really quite threatening. Overall, I've seen slightly more Stern Guard running competitive lists compared with Hellblasters, but it does look like they're being used, either in smaller units or big ones with character buffs. Overall, I do think they're quite a strong unit. Perhaps the biggest weaknesses are little durability. There's quite a lot of things that kill standard Space Marines pretty easily, Hellblasters themselves being a good example. If they're overcharging, which I think usually you will want to do to get their max damage output, they will slowly kill themselves with hazardous rolls over the course of the game, so it might not be all that long a lived squad. And certain units that still have -1 damage rules or stratagems can counter their damage fairly hard. They might be a bit underwhelming fired into a big block of custodies with -1 damage, for example. If I were trying to use them in game, I'd probably try and make sure they get the first strike, either via hiding behind ruins, using transports, or coming out of reserves. I think you really wouldn't want to have these guys picked up too easily by some general purpose firepower before they get at least a proper round of shooting in. At least with that in mind, they do have the assault keyword, meaning that their threat range is quite big. That's quite a good thing for getting in line of sight. Ideally, if they can target them, then somewhere around 2 to 4 wound elite infantry are probably your top targets, ideally without invulnerable saves if possible, though they're fairly good against most things. If they had to be shooting at monsters and vehicles, it would be really quite nice to have them buffed with Oath of Moment, as it's absolutely massive for them and turns them into really quite an efficient tank hunter. Ideally, while they're shooting, if they can still stay hidden from some of the scariest enemy guns, it would be nice, or at least get cover. But I do feel a lot of the time they're probably just going to be a bit of a one-hit wonder, then shot down by the enemy due to being fairly easy to kill and also very dangerous. But at least if that is the case, then you get your return fire shots, and hopefully you can try and aim for something that's yet to deal damage in the turn, so you shoot it down before it damages you, or maybe something that the opponent absolutely needs to score objectives. You could have some really big swings in the enemy's turn if the stars align for you. In any case, I think we'll leave that there for the Hellblasters today. Let me know how your Space Marine Plasma squads have been getting on in 10th edition so far. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's how I can keep all these videos coming quite so regularly, with new ones out quite so often. If you have been enjoying it, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.